Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your chosen sources and, well, distill the essence of knowledge, really giving you a shortcut to being truly well informed. Today, we're embarking on a deeply personal and incredibly honest journey. It's inspired by a listener who shared their experience of recovery. And it wasn't the neat, tidy surrender story we sometimes hear. It was chaotic, resistant, and ultimately a kind of grudging acceptance. Many narratives of recovery talk about that profound moment of surrender, maybe a sudden white light experience. But for a lot of people, the path into recovery, especially into programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, well, it's anything but smooth. It's often marked by skepticism, really deep-seated resistance, and this feeling of being dragged in kicking and screaming. We're calling this the Gatecrasher experience.
Yeah, and what's truly striking here is how often that real-life journey just completely contradicts the idealized, almost poetic version of recovery we sometimes see portrayed. So today we'll explore why this reluctance is so incredibly common. We'll look at the often brutal internal and external battles people fight, and how even through this initial, sometimes almost hostile resistance, profound change, and a completely new way of being can actually emerge. This deep dive, it's really for anyone who didn't arrive at the doors of recovery with a clean slate, but maybe came with a trail of wreckage behind them, a heavy dose of doubt, and perhaps even, like you said, a defiant glare.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this raw, unfiltered entry into recovery. We'll be drawing on some compelling memoirs, historical accounts of AA's own evolution, and insightful reflections on the 12 steps. And while there are many paths to recovery, today we're specifically focusing on the framework of the 12 steps, particularly as found in Alcoholics Anonymous, because these programs are often where the gatecrasher finds themselves, even if it's reluctantly. We'll explore that initial no-way mindset, that desperate turning point when, well, the options just vanished, and the gradual, sometimes painfully slow path toward a transformed life. Okay, so let's start by unpacking that initial, really powerful resistance, why those doors to recovery might have felt completely closed even when technically they were wide open. Our listener's story, like you hear so often, it begins with this immediate, almost visceral refusal to identify with the label alcoholic. They felt that Ruby, alcoholic, that phrase was just not my truth. They saw it as a life sentence laden with shame. That's a huge hurdle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not just a small thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental. And it's far more complex than just simple denial. What's profoundly evident in our sources is how deeply, deeply ingrained the stigma of addiction is in our culture. It creates this almost impenetrable psychological barrier. Just think about the casual phrases we use sometimes, like the alcoholic phase. You hear it thrown around, often by successful, intelligent, attractive people, kind of normalizing heavy drinking.
Right, like it's just a temporary thing.
Exactly, becomes a convenient intellectual construct, doesn't it? A way to dismiss genuinely problematic behavior as just a blip, something temporary. And that prevents any honest self-assessment. This avoidance of the label, it's a really powerful, almost sophisticated defense mechanism. It lets people cling to a self-image that directly contradicts the reality of their situation, making it incredibly difficult to see the actual problem for what it is. As one of our sources, Sober Curious, explores, this pervasive stigma makes it profoundly difficult for individuals to even join in when they first encounter recovery. It just leads to continued self-delusion. They hang on to the belief that their drinking is just, a little thing that would straighten itself out.
Yeah, the glitch.
A temporary glitch, exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than seeing it as a deep-seated progressive issue, and largely because society has made the alternative, that label alcoholic, so unpalatable, so loaded with judgment. So for the gatecrasher, accepting that label feels like accepting this shameful identity, not a pathway to freedom.
And that deep-seated denial of the label, it often goes hand in hand with this almost unshakable belief in personal control, right? And sheer willpower. Before truly accepting they need help, many, like our listener, were just convinced they could somehow manage it, stop their drinking through sheer determination. It's that little voice whispering, if I just try harder this time, I can manage it, I can control it. But what do the sources really reveal about the power of willpower when you're facing addiction? Is it ever truly enough for that gatecrasher?
That's such a crucial question. And the sources are, well, they're strikingly unanimous on this point. For the alcoholic, willpower, just by itself, is a dangerous and ultimately futile delusion. One source, Living Sober, puts it very starkly. It says, willpower all by itself is about as effective a cure for alcohol addiction as it is for cancer.
Wow. That's a strong comparison.
It is, and it highlights not just the severity of the condition, but also its biological and psychological underpinnings. It moves it beyond just a simplistic view of it being a moral failing. Most people, especially the resistant gatecrasher, they try to go it alone. They hope to control it or stop completely, convinced that this time will be different. Yet what they find consistently is no lasting success.
So it just leads to this awful cycle.
A vicious and soul-destroying cycle, yes. It's vividly described in the common sense of drinking. You have the drunkenness, acute nervous hangover, remorse, feelings of inferiority, then drunkenness again. And each rotation of that cycle just reinforces this profound feeling of powerlessness. Yet tragically, the illusion of control persists. The mind gets caught in this relentless pattern, and it struggles fiercely to see the futility of its own attempts to manage something that's fundamentally unmanageable. So it ends up perpetuating the very problem it's trying to solve, making it, as the source says, not easy to admit we needed help. The gatecrasher truly believes their willpower is strong enough, that it can conquer anything, only to find it's just utterly disarmed by alcohol.
Okay, so if they're not blaming themselves or their perceived lack of willpower, then what? Often they point fingers outward, right? Attributing their troubles to everything but the alcohol. Our listener, for example, talked about how their initial focus was all on external stressors. They'd say things like, "My problem is the car and my sarcastic mouth," instead of looking inward at their drinking as the root cause. This deflection, it's a really common tactic, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic, deeply entrenched defense mechanism. This externalization of blame, it acts like a shield, really. It prevents self-reflection and just prolongs that cycle of addiction. There's an account in The Courage to Change where a speaker realized they were kind of liking it, saying, "I'm an alcoholic," but not buying the progression.
Interesting. So saying the words but not really believing it applied?
Exactly. They were still thinking, "My problem is the car and my sarcastic mouth." The real blind spot is the alcohol itself, which insidiously just blocks out the reality of life, even while it's causing immense pain and chaos. And the individual, often quite unconsciously, creates this whole cluster of behavior patterns. Lying, sneaking, egocentricity, narcissism. These aren't just unfortunate side effects. They're active strategies designed specifically to protect their drinking.
Wow. Protect the drink.
Yes, keep it going, deflect scrutiny. And this intense self-deception, it directly prevents that crucial step 4, the searching and fearless moral inventory, from even getting started. Because, as one source puts it, it may feel too painful to think about how we have hurt others and hurt ourselves. So instead of turning on the light in that dark, cluttered room of their inner life, they prefer to walk around in the dark. You'll probably keep tripping over the furniture. That's from A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps.
That's a powerful image.
Isn't it? For the gatecrasher, every problem is out there, never within. Never connected to the one thing they absolutely refuse to acknowledge.
So beyond these internal battles, the self-blame, the externalizing, there's another really big barrier that often keeps the gatecrasher away from even considering recovery. It's that deep-seated fear that a sober life would just be, well, boring. It sounds almost tragic, but it's a powerful perception. If alcohol is really the problem, why is the absence of it so terrifying? Are the sources suggesting this fear is actually part of the addiction's hold? Like it twists your perception of joy?
That's a really perceptive way to put it. Yes, this fear isn't just, a preference. It's a symptom. It's a deeply ingrained part of the lie of alcohol that fundamentally distorts reality. The sources describe sobriety initially as appearing like a death sentence of boring, or a life half lived with half smiles that smelled like Clorox bleach.
Clorox bleach, wow. That's specific.
It paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this perception, it stems from alcohol's ability to essentially hijack the brain's reward system. When you drink, the brain releases dopamine, that neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and motivation. Over time, the brain gets used to this artificial flood, making natural sources of dopamine like genuine connection, creative pursuits, or just simple appreciation of beauty seem kind of bland by comparison.
So normal life just doesn't register the same way.
Exactly. Quit Like a Woman illustrates this perfectly. It recounts how a group of friends was totally stumped, just trying to make a list of things they could do without alcohol. It really highlights this insidious belief that alcohol is somehow necessary to let loose, to enjoy ourselves, to be weird, to be like kids. The fear is profound because the individual genuinely believed their capacity for wonder and awe has just vanished, or at least it's inaccessible without that chemical crutch. But the discovery, as the sources reveal again and again, is that my life without alcohol is where my actual living began.
So it wasn't boring after all.
Not at all. The truth is, our natural capacity for wonder, awe, and absorption, it doesn't leave us. That stuff never leaves us. It is always there. Sobriety isn't boring. It's actually where authentic joy, the kind unmasked by alcohol's false promises, truly begins to reemerge. But that's a concept that's almost unimaginable to the fearful gatecrasher. That fear is really a testament to how deeply alcohol has convinced them that it is the source of their joy, rather than the thing blocking it.
And speaking of things that turn people off, the spiritual component of the 12 steps can be another major point of resistance, right? Alongside maybe the perceived strictures of the fellowship itself. Just mentioning the word God can be a huge barrier for the skeptical, the intellectual, or the non-religious gatecrasher. But what's even more surprising, looking at our sources, is that this resistance to gatecrashers wasn't always just external. Sometimes it came from within the early fellowship itself.
Yeah, this is a really critical point. It reveals the very human, sometimes imperfect origins of even a profoundly helpful movement. Sober Curious definitely highlights how those religious overtones in AA's language, referencing God in steps 3, 5, 6, and 11, can be a significant deterrent for many people. For someone who's already skeptical and resistant, these explicit references can feel like an immediate demand for a rigid belief system they just don't have or maybe actively oppose. But what's truly eye-opening, connecting this to the final picture of the gatecrasher experience, is that in the early days of AA, there was actually resistance within the fellowship to certain types of newcomers. Those deemed gatecrashers of a different kind, you could say.
How so?
Well, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions describes how some early groups were resolved to admit nobody to AA, but that hypothetical class of people we termed pure alcoholics. And this meant a pretty startling list of exclusions. People like beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out.
Wow, that's quite a list. Not very welcoming.
Not at all. It's frankly discriminatory, and it shows the historical struggle with inclusivity, even within a movement designed specifically to help. So this kind of internal judgment, coupled with an individual's own aversion to the spiritual aspect, created this kind of double barrier. One member even recalled the freeze that drunk gave me, just when the word spiritual was mentioned. This historical detail isn't just a footnote. It's a powerful reminder that the very spaces designed for healing can, sometimes inadvertently, create new forms of exclusion. It mirrors the individual's internal struggle with feeling unworthy or different. So the courage to belong, even when the system itself wasn't perfect, that's a profound gatecrasher insight. It reminds us that transformation often happens despite, not because of, those initial perceived barriers.
Okay, so despite all this initial resistance, the denial, the illusion of control, the external blame, the fear of boredom, the aversion to anything spiritual, that descent often continues. It pulls the individual deeper into the vortex of addiction. When that profound reluctance finally meets rock bottom, the vicious cycle intensifies, often dramatically. What does that escalating crisis look like for the gatecrasher who's fought so hard to avoid it?
Yeah, for the gatecrasher, the descent into active addiction is often this terrifying acceleration. What once brought maybe fleeting relief now just brings deepening despair. Experience, strength, and hope paints a pretty grim picture. A progression from, say, celebratory drinking to a profound depression, eventually culminating in a long, steady grind of drinking all the time. And this isn't just about drinking more, it's a fundamental shift in why they're drinking.
Right, it's not for fun anymore.
Not at all. The individual often develops this pervasive persecution complex, feeling like everyone was after me. That's a classic manifestation of alcohol-induced paranoia. They're no longer seeking pleasure, they're desperately chasing this fragile, elusive numbness, and in the process, they're throwing everything away. Jobs, relationships, self-respect. The physical erosion becomes undeniable too, almost like a public advertisement of their private hell. We hear stories of even more intense shakes, the body just in open revolt, making basic functions impossible. Think about that poignant account of Dr. Bob before his final exams. His hand trembled so violently he couldn't even hold a pencil. Left 3 examination booklets completely blank.
It's devastating.
It is. And it's not a moral failing. It's the raw, visceral reality of the disease model of alcoholism. It's defined in Not God as a compulsion, a pathological craving, an obsession of the mind that condemns one to drink, and an allergy of the body that condemns one to die. For the gatecrasher, this physical breakdown often represents one of the first irrefutable pieces of evidence that their willpower has just been utterly defeated. It's like a betrayal by their own body. And physiologically, this naked mind sheds some light on why this happens. The brain, constantly flooded with artificial stimulants, tries to regain balance, homeostasis, by producing counterchemicals like dynorphin.
Okay.
This effectively turns down the natural pleasure receptors. So the gatecrasher finds themselves in this insidious trap. They have to drink more and more just to feel anything. But at the same time, everyday joys, a sunset, a good meal, laughing with a loved one, become muted. They register as bland, unsatisfying. The very mechanism designed to adapt their body to alcohol ultimately robs them of joy, pushing them deeper into the cycle they so vehemently denied.
And as that vicious cycle intensifies, it inevitably leads to that profound loss of self you mentioned, and loss of connection too. The person you once were feels like they're just slipping away, and your most cherished relationships become these tragic casualties. It sounds like a really hollowed out existence.
It's precisely that. It's a process of emotional and spiritual attrition that leaves the individual just utterly isolated. What's so deeply resonant in the sources is how universal this erosion of self really is. One of the most painful aspects described is the development of intense self-hatred, a torment so profound that it actually leads to drinking primarily to ease my conscience and forget.
Drinking to forget the self-hatred caused by drinking?
Exactly. It's not about seeking joy anymore. It's a desperate attempt to silence that internal accuser. And this creates a further downward spiral where the more I drank, the worse it got, and the more I had to drink. The self-loathing fuels the addiction, which in turn deepens the self-loathing. It's brutal. Eventually, individuals find they've literally managed to drink my way through all my friends. I had no one in the world to talk to. This profound isolation, described in experience, strength, and hope as a kind of day-by-day suicide, aligns perfectly with the idea that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body, as Bill sees it explains. They become trapped by envy, resentment, distorted perceptions. Their internal narrative justifies every destructive choice, driving others away. There's even a chilling parallel in Augustine of Hippo's ancient Confessions. He describes being deafened by the clanking of the chains of my mortality and wandering into barren fields of sorrow, unable to distinguish pure affection from unholy desire.
Wow, centuries ago.
Yes, it reflects that same profound moral and emotional confusion, where the ability to connect authentically with oneself or others is just lost. It leaves this hollowed-out self a mere shadow of who they once were. The Gatecrasher, who probably once prized their independence above all, now finds themselves utterly alone, often by their own hand.
It's clear that for many gatecrashers, that moment of breakthrough, it isn't some gentle awakening. It's often a dramatic crisis that absolutely forces the issue. It's that last chance moment, isn't it? When every other avenue has closed, when the internal and external wreckage is just undeniable and there's nowhere left to turn but towards help, however unwelcome or, begrudgingly accepted that help might be. What does it actually take to finally break through that deep-seated resistance and trigger this desperate turning point?
That really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It highlights the raw, often brutal reality of hitting bottom. It often takes something catastrophic, a moment where that illusion of control completely shatters. There's a poignant example from Daily Reflections. Someone recounts losing career, family, and health. Yet even then, they remained unconvinced that my way of life needed a second look. Incredible. It wasn't until the critical illness of their infant son, coupled with the terrifying realization that alcohol was actually stopping working, it wasn't providing any escape or relief anymore, that this individual finally hit their knees. They describe it as literally staring into God's eyes, begging for help. This moment of complete defeat is the main taproot from which our whole society springs, as Bill sees it so profoundly explains. It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? True strength, the possibility of a new life, emerges from absolute, abject surrender, often forced surrender. And this often involves a desperate, almost primal plea, like the one vividly described in the varieties of religious experience, where an individual feels strangled by an unseen hand. They struggle to even pray for mercy, but are determined to finish the sentence of prayer for mercy if I did strangle and die.
That's intense, life or death.
Absolutely. That visceral life or death struggle reflects the dawning recognition that my problems are too big to solve by myself. I need not be alone with them if I am willing to accept help from a higher power. That's from Courage to Change One Day at a Time in Al-Anon II. So it's often not about willingly stepping into the light. It's about being pushed to the very brink of existence, often in a moment of unimaginable pain or fear, and finally crying out for it, even if that cry is laced with anger and resentment.
Okay, here's where it gets really compelling for me. The grudging entry into recovery itself. Once that harrowing bottom is hit, once the crisis forces the issue, those first tentative steps are often, hesitant. Observational, maybe. rather than immediate enthusiastic engagement. You're not exactly skipping into your first meeting, are you? For the gatecrasher, what does that initial reluctant engagement with recovery actually look like?
You're absolutely right. Skipping is definitely not involved. For the gatecrasher, those earliest experiences in AA or similar programs are often purely observational. It's a cautious, almost suspicious peeking in. One source describes seeing men who were good, hardworking drunkards, apparently in their right minds. But the newcomer's internal thought was still, I just couldn't see where I came into the picture. They're still holding on to that not me syndrome, even when they're confronted with undeniable evidence of a shared experience right in front of them.
Still feeling different? Separate?
Completely. Others, like the person met by Bill D in one account, were just quite bored because I'd never seen the guy before and had no interest at all in what, where, and when he drank.
Hmm.
That initial barrier of self-absorption and skepticism remains really formidable. Yet even in that state of disengagement, the seeds of change are sometimes planted. What truly registered often wasn't the details of the stories people shared, but the palpable, visible change in the individuals themselves. Bill D was happy. He was released, relieved from his alcoholism, and was happy and contented because of it. That I shall never forget.
So seeing the result, not necessarily connecting with the process yet.
Precisely. This powerfully highlights that core principle of AA, attraction rather than promotion. Newcomers witness people laughing and relaxing and having a good time, maybe, and a tiny, almost imperceptible thought might spark. These people have something I want. This real fellowship, based on unselfishness and mutual help, slowly, grudgingly, starts to replace the false fellowship of drinking companions, as detailed in sources like 24 Hours a Day and The Courage to Change. It's like an unspoken invitation, a demonstration of possibility that slowly chips away at the newcomer's skepticism, often long before they're willing to admit it to themselves, let alone anyone else. They don't want to be there, but something in the room, maybe a sense of peace, a shared understanding, begins to resonate, however faintly.
Okay, so once that grudging step is taken and maybe a tiny glimmer of hope emerges, one of the first really deep dives into self-discovery and recovery is the moral inventory, step 4. We know step 4 is about this searching and fearless moral inventory. But for someone who is basically dragged into recovery, whose primary defense has always been self-deception and blaming others, how do the program and our sources suggest they even begin such a fearless process? What are the immediate psychological barriers there?
Yeah, for the gatecrasher, the very mention of step 4 can feel like being asked to willingly walk straight into a psychological minefield. It's terrifying. After years of constructing these elaborate defenses, meticulously avoiding self-reflection, consistently externalizing blame, the immense aversion to an in-depth look at behaviors, attitudes, and experiences that contributed to compulsive behaviors is just overwhelming. It's more than just, opening old wounds. It's about dismantling the entire self-protective narrative they've carefully built around their addiction. It's entirely common, as the sources note, to feel intense guilt, shame, confusion, and hurt, and to immediately question the value of opening old wounds. The natural inclination is just bury the past and try to move forward.
Just forget about it.
Right. But the program, through its structured approach, reframes this potentially painful process. A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps uses that great analogy of turning on a light in a pitch-dark room. If you keep walking around in the dark, you'll probably keep tripping over the furniture and bruising yourself. But when you turn on the light, you can see where you're going. So this inventory isn't really about self-flagellation. It's about illumination. It sheds light on ongoing bitterness, animosity, fear, or hostility in relationships. It requires acknowledging harm done or recognizing unfinished business to attend to. This whole process is about moving from self-delusion towards more realism and therefore more honesty about ourselves, as the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions emphasizes. The initial resistance is immense, absolutely, but the guidance is often to just start, usually with the help of a sponsor, someone who can help illuminate these dark corners without judgment. It's a truly courageous act for someone who has previously only known evasion and denial.
Now, a huge sticking point for many gatecrashers, as we touched on, is the higher power dilemma. That spiritual component can feel incredibly alienating, especially if they associate it with rigid religious dogma they don't subscribe to. How do the steps actually address this for the skeptics, the agnostics, or even the atheists who might just recoil at the mere mention of God?
This is really where the program's genius, I think, and its remarkable adaptability truly shines through. For many gatecrashers, a pivotal moment of grudging acceptance comes with the realization that they can actually choose your own conception of God. That understanding, as one account in Daily Reflections puts it, hit me hard and melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years.
That's freeing.
It's incredibly freeing because it dismantles that immediate assumption of a prescriptive dogmatic deity. For some, the higher power isn't a traditional him. It might be a her, or simply their own spirit, soul, or connection to source. It could even be an essence or life force, as A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps clarifies. Many people initially use the group itself, the fellowship, as their higher power. They find strength in the collective wisdom and support. The key, especially for the gatecrasher, isn't about achieving unwavering belief overnight. It's about finding a willingness to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. This radical freedom from dogma allows individuals to move past their initial, often deeply ingrained resistance to the spiritual aspect. It helps them understand that faith is always close at hand, waiting for those who will listen to that inner voice, as 24 hours a day suggests. The experience is often described not as a religious conversion necessarily, but as feeling God's power is mine, or connecting to a divine omniscience and divine omnipotence that provides immediate inspiration and enlightenment. That's from In Tune with the Infinite. It's really about finding your path to something greater than your own struggling ego, not conforming to someone else's path. And that sidesteps the very intellectual and spiritual hang-ups that initially kept them out.
Okay, so after the rigorous internal work of the moral inventory and that often reluctant connection to a higher power, however they define it, comes another really challenging but ultimately freeing act: sharing. Step 5. For someone who's spent years in isolation, self-deception, carefully guarding secrets, admitting the exact nature of our wrongs to another human being must be incredibly difficult. What's the transformational impact of that step, particularly for the gatecrasher?
Oh, it's an act of profound vulnerability, absolutely. Perhaps the most terrifying step for someone who's become accustomed to hiding and blaming, yet it's also a pivotal turning point. Step 5 asks us to admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And this practice, it isn't new. It's described as very ancient, something that's been validated in every century. Even psychiatrists and psychologists recognize it as fulfilling a deep need for human well-being. For gatecrashers who felt utterly isolated, who perhaps believed their sins or mistakes were uniquely original and unforgivable, this step marks the beginning of true kinship with man and God, as the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions explains. The simple act of voicing their deepest secrets, their shame, their resentments to another person often leads to this astonishing realization. These experiences are not unique, they are shared.
That must lift a huge weight.
An enormous burden of isolation and despair. This process helps to counter the old negative ideas and that exaggerated self-criticism that has plagued them for so long. It allows them to come out of hiding and begin to see their situation in a different light, as courage to change, one day at a time, and Al-Anon II puts it. It's about accepting what they find within themselves. As Daily Reflections notes, humility sounds so much like humiliation, but it really is the ability to look at myself and honestly accept what I find. For the gatecrasher, who likely entered recovery armed with this fortress of pride and self-sufficiency, this act of humble confession is a radical but necessary step. It moves them past self-delusion and allows them to begin building genuine connections, first with themselves and then with others. It's often the first real step out of that lonely darkness.
And once that honest sharing happens, once the weight of secrets starts to lift, the next crucial phase is actually doing something about it, making amends. This is the uncomfortable but absolutely necessary action of steps 8 and 9, where you confront the people you've harmed. For someone who's just barely accepted help, who's wrestled with every single previous step, this must feel like yet another monumental, almost terrifying task.
It absolutely feels monumental. It's filled with profound vulnerability and, yes, genuine fear. Step 8 involves making that list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And this isn't just a rote exercise. It requires a deep internal shift towards forgiveness, often as suggested in Daily Reflections, starting with forgiving others before even adding names to the list. What's fascinating here is the focus is on developing willingness, recognizing that holding on to anger and resentment only perpetuates the cycle of pain. For the gatecrasher, this willingness might initially be quite grudging, but it's a vital internal shift away from self-pity and blame.
So the willingness comes first.
Yes. Then step 9 moves into the present by asking us to make direct amends, except when to do so would injure them or others. And this direct action, yes, it can feel incredibly vulnerable and afraid. It's fraught with doubts about being honest, facing rejection, maybe reopening old wounds for others. Yet it's described as an indispensable condition for the birth of a new spiritual life. The sources emphasize that while some amends might seem impossible right now, just making the easier ninth step amends can actually build the courage and willingness for the harder ones. They act like crucial stepping stones. It's a process of making peace or making things right with another person, which leads to a deeper understanding of ourselves and preparing us for a new way of relating to the world. That's from A Woman's Way through the 12 Steps. This isn't about instant perfection or fixing everything overnight. It's a committed, often challenging journey towards making things right as best you can. It's the reconstruction of life, moving into the final phase of the initial steps, which taught me how to live a spiritual life, according to daily reflections. For the gatecrasher, this is often the moment they truly begin to own their past actions, move beyond mere regret, and actively start to rebuild their integrity and their place in the world.
So after these initial, often reluctant and deeply challenging steps are taken, something truly profound begins to unfold, doesn't it? It's the emergence of a new self as we move through step 10 and beyond. What does this profound transformation actually look like for someone who once kicked and screamed their way into recovery, who resisted every single step? How do they begin to find a sense of inner truth and purpose?
It's often a complete redefinition of self. It's like an internal renaissance for the gatecrasher who maybe once identified only with their addiction or their fierce independence. Through this painstaking process, a genuine sense of self begins to emerge. They start asking fundamental questions that were previously drowned out by the noise of alcohol or denial. What do I think? What do I feel? What is my truth? What are my options? A Woman's Way through the 12 Steps describes this beautifully as literally needing to give birth to the self, moving from that one-dimensional addicted self to a multifaceted self. And this continuous self-discovery is supported by Step 10, which encourages us to continue to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This acts as a kind of daily vigilance, turning everyday events like mirrors that reflect our deeper selves, as A Woman's Way through the 12 Steps explains. This isn't about constant self-criticism, though. It's more like a gentle, ongoing self-awareness.
Checking in with yourself regularly.
Exactly. This continuous self-reflection and prompt admission of wrongs lead to a deeper and better understanding of humility. It fosters both personal growth and, importantly, usefulness to others, according to daily reflections. It's a profound shift away from being driven by those nagging, negative thoughts and external pressures. Instead, there's an appreciation for small accomplishments, a cultivation of gratitude. This new focus ultimately replaces those futile disputes over property, money, and authority with a profound appreciation for one's spiritual heritage. As stated in Courage to Change One Day at a Time and Al-Aranon II and the Language of the Heart. The gatecrasher, who once saw only obstacles and misery, begins to discover this inner landscape of possibility, creativity, and authentic joy they never imagined possible. They actually start to trust their own instincts, their own truth.
It really sounds like the real magic of recovery, even for the most reluctant individual, turns out to be this profound internal shift. It impacts all areas of life, not just the absence of alcohol. It truly becomes an inside job, like you said earlier, a transformation of perspective and just being.
It's exactly right. The core insight that emerges again and again is that happiness is an inside job, and it's about making a firmer commitment to my decision to be happy, as noted in Courage to Change One Day at a Time in Al-Anon II. The focus shifts dramatically away from external circumstances, away from anxiously thinking, well, the career hasn't gotten any better, there's no more money coming in, towards a profound internal turnaround inside my skin. This means learning to accept things that are genuinely beyond one's control, rather than constantly fighting against them.
Acceptance, not resignation.
Precisely. This profound shift means letting go of worrying constantly about tomorrow or dwelling endlessly in the wreckage of my past. Instead, learning to live from day to day, as a speaker in The Courage to Change so eloquently puts it. This present moment perspective, it cultivates genuine gratitude for the now, for small changes, for those daily reprieves, and it slowly builds a foundational self-esteem that was completely lacking before. The sources remind us, the spiritual life is not a theory. It works, but I have to live it. This daily reprieve is contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, which requires conscious effort through things like prayer and meditation, and maintaining that conscious contact with a higher power, however that's understood for the individual. That's highlighted in daily reflections. And this deep internal work, this acceptance of what is, leads eventually to joy, happiness, and wisdom. And crucially, the ability to love and react to events around me with the eyes of a faith that just wasn't previously possible. It's a profound reorientation of one's entire being, where the source of contentment finally moves from those external fleeting fixes to an internal sustainable wellspring.
And finally, we come to the ultimate paradox, perhaps, for the reluctant recoverer, finding that helping others, carrying the message, actually solidifies their own sobriety. It's that attraction model, really, in action, isn't it? A beautiful full circle. How does this act of giving back become so vital for someone who once fought so hard just to receive help themselves?
It really is a beautiful and essential capstone to the Gatecrasher's journey. Step 12 is about carrying this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. The sources consistently emphasize that the best 12th step work we can do is by example, operating through attraction rather than promotion, as one study guide points out. This isn't about proselytizing or, giving unsolicited advice. It involves simply sharing our own strength, hope, and experience, not trying to teach, threaten, exhort, warn, or advise. It's really about trusting that a newcomer's higher power will guide them, just as one's own was eventually found, maybe surprisingly. This active engagement, this selfless service is vital. It helps recharge my batteries so that I have light when it's needed. It reminds one of where I have come from, where I am now, and the limitless possibilities that lie ahead. That's from Daily Reflections. It transforms that difficulty with living into a joy of living, manifesting the profound truth that I can't keep it unless I give it away. For the gatecrasher who likely entered recovery focused solely on their own pain and problems, this outward focus on helping others breaks the chains of self-centeredness that are so inherent in addiction. It creates this incredible cycle of healing and connection that goes far beyond those initial grudging steps. It solidifies their own sobriety through purpose, connection, and the living demonstration of these transformative principles. It's really in extending a hand that they truly find their own footing. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow, we've certainly journeyed through the raw and often uncomfortable entry into recovery today. From that deep-seated skepticism and fierce resistance all the way to the grudging acceptance and eventual, maybe unexpected, flourishing of a new self, the Gatecrasher experience really reminds us that the path to a changed life is rarely linear, is it? Rarely easy and almost never that idealized version sometimes portrayed in popular culture.
Absolutely. What we've really seen today is that true, lasting change often begins not with a willing embrace, but with a desperate, sometimes angry surrender, maybe a forced surrender. The process involves dismantling those deep-seated self-delusions, confronting past harms, and slowly, often with great effort, and sometimes against one's own initial will, building a new, more honest relationship with oneself, with others, and with a power greater than oneself, however that's understood. And the fact that early AA itself struggled with accepting the odd ones, people like beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women, that only highlights the universal challenge of compassion and inclusion. It underscores the profound individual struggle just to belong, to feel worthy, even when feeling unworthy because of my smile, as one source put it. The Gatecrasher's journey teaches us that vulnerability, even when it's forced upon us, is often the true gateway to strength.
So if you've ever felt that your story is too unique, maybe too damaged, or simply too resistant to fit into some neat mold of recovery, consider this. Perhaps your very reluctance, your chaotic and unfiltered journey isn't a barrier to healing at all. Perhaps instead it is the authentic, powerful starting point for your most profound and individual transformation. What might happen if you allowed your unique struggles, your raw, undeniable truth to become the very keys to your freedom?